break. In the first session, Sir Linton said that polarization can be tackled much more assertively with strong values-based leadership. He said leaders are dealers in hope. Well, I'm pleased that between now and lunchtime we're going to see what political leadership looks like. First, I'm delighted that we have with us Her Excellency Noura bint Mohammed Al Kaabi, who is the Minister of Culture here in the UAE and has the knowledge brief as well. She previously held the post of Minister of State for Federal National Council Affairs. As Minister of Culture and Knowledge, Her Excellency is responsible for the promotion of all UAE cultural fields on both a national and international stage. She's a respected political leader with a reputation for delivery. Her Excellency also holds the position of Chairwoman of the Media Zone Authority Abu Dhabi and 2454, the home of media and entertainment in Abu Dhabi. She's Chair of Abu Dhabi's Media Company and Chair of Abu Dhabi's National Exhibitions Company. And in 2014, she was named as one of Forbes Middle East's 30 most influential women in government and was awarded Businesswoman of the Year at the Gulf Business Industry Awards. She's joined on her left by David Rothkopf, writer, strategist, political consultant, foreign policy expert. David is CEO of the Rothkopf Group, an advisory firm focusing on international issues. His firm is co-creator and co-presenter of Culture Summit, a global event convening international leaders from policy, culture and tech each year here in Abu Dhabi. He's visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a senior fellow at the School of Advanced International Studies. He's the author of numerous internationally acclaimed books, including The Great Questions of Tomorrow, Power, Inc., Superclass, Running the World, and National Insecurity, American Leadership in the Age of Fear. He's a frequent contributor to international media and hosts the acclaimed Deep State radio podcast each week. Ladies and gentlemen, my two guests. Now, Your Excellency, if I could turn to you first. You hold the political brief to build knowledge capacity. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of education as an antidote to polarization?
Well, it's wonderful to be here this morning and in such an unusual weather here in Abu Dhabi. It's for us, it's fun because I feel I'm not in Abu Dhabi while I'm in Abu Dhabi. So welcome everyone. Talking about polarization, I would like to go back to the mid-90s. We had to go with my father to study in the States. I was in junior high. It was my first time to be in the States. We were in Pennsylvania. I grew up in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi, with multi-nationals, with different nationalities, and I've started my early years in a private school. So it wasn't like working with someone who are different. It was different, but being in a different culture was a kind of a culture shock for me. It was during the year where there was the famous Bronco chase on TV, and I was like, is that normal for TV to film a chase and and seeing Oprah and the beginning of the reality TV, the real world on MTV. So that was kind of cultural shock. But what's the most interesting part of it is myself being in a different country with a different culture and understanding it, and having friends and exchanging that type of discussions that will open up the way we talk with each other. So I believe when you talk about knowledge development, what simply has to be done is how can we connect with each other? We are in an age where information is disseminated in a much faster way. Back in the mid-90s with digital technology, with the social media, which is sometimes a good thing, and most of the time a good thing, but how can we use it as well to exchange that discussion? I feel that will decrease polarization if we wanted to use it the right way with certain cultural programs, cultural exchange, and using also the digital technology to disseminate that kind of information.
David, build on this, if I may. It's more than tech, right? We're talking about something more fundamental going on as well. How do you think about trying to address some of these issues? I mean, culture is one way of doing it.
Let me build off of Noura's analogy. The culture shock of going from the UAE, let's say in middle school, to going to Pennsylvania and dealing with the real world and Oprah and O.J. Simpson in a slow car chase is something we're all going through right now and we're not aware of it. Mm-hmm. We are at a watershed moment in the history of the world where we're going into a new system. And it's not one of those once in a decade changes or once in a lifetime changes. This is a once in every sort of 500 years change, where the systems of our society are fundamentally being rewired. For the first time in history, we are entering a world in which there is one global cultural ecosystem. In other words, each and every person anywhere on the planet is connected to each and every other person everywhere on the planet, all the time, in real time. And that changes what we think of as a community. And it's going to change how we think of governance. And it's going to change what we think of as culture. And as we see those changes take place, we're also going to see changes in economics, and we're going to see technological changes in what is a job. When you take a job and you go from 7 days a week to 5 days a week, it's quite shocking. That's what happened at the beginning of the 20th century. But if you go from 5 days a week to 3 days a week because of automation or other things, then we have to ask questions like, what is the purpose of our life, right? Because most people have been raised to believe that their work is the purpose of their life. But we are really on the cusp of an era where that's going to change as well. And so culture, the nature of war and peace, for the past, X number of decades, we've thought about, war as being impossibly costly because of nuclear technology. But now that we've entered the era of information technology, it is almost too inexpensive to ignore. So we've gone from a world in which we couldn't have global thermonuclear war to a world in which we're always having cyber conflict, in which all nations are going after each other all the time. And it changes the nature of tension in society. I could go on, but the point is, this is all happening very, very rapidly. And we're having political debates about, well, in my country, forgive us. That's all I can say. But we're having political debates about today or tomorrow, right? But these sweeping changes are happening, and we're not even asking the basic philosophical questions.
But are we looking at, is this a symptom of the declining influence and power of Western democracies, if you like, of advanced economies?
I don't think it is. I think we're at a watershed. And I think, just as we sort of entered into the Enlightenment, we embraced certain ideas of democracy, and we went through from John Locke to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and on. We're at another one of those periods where we're going to reinvent this. I think one of the things that's happened in the West is we assumed because we invented the internet that the world was going to look like us. And what is happening, of course, is that simultaneous to all this change, the fastest growing economies in the world are not in the West. The most powerful rising economies in the world are not in the West. And their views of what that society should look like don't dovetail with our views. And one of the things, I'll just end with this, that we have to keep in mind is that throughout civilization, where the center of innovation, the center of economic gravity has been, is where the center of intellectual gravity has been. And it's moved across the world, and it was in the Arab world for a while, it was in Europe for a while, it moved across the Atlantic, it was in the United States for a while. It's now moving across the Pacific. And the center of intellectual gravity is there, and these changes are taking place. A bunch of countries that haven't played as big a role in determining what the future of societies are going to look like are going to play that role.
So you talk about the purpose of life. Obviously, culture plays a huge role in that. I wonder, Your Excellency, if we can talk about what's happening down the road in the Louvre. I mean, this is an extraordinary partnership between two great states, the UAE and France. Can you give us an insight into how it came about, what the benefits are for the UAE, and what are the benefits for the French state?
Well, it's wonderful to to ask the question nowadays and say I'm going to the Louvre, and someone will ask you again which Louvre, is it the Paris or the Abu Dhabi one? So that by itself is something that we're truly proud of. Such partnership. It's a unique one. It has been in discussion with both governments since 2007, and having the Louvre outside of Paris for the first time ever. It's not about replicating the museum. It's not about having another museum that is totally totally French and with the French artists, with my admiration and respect as well. Yet the most important element is how there is an exchange between cultures, between East and West. Who didn't visit the museum would understand that this museum is truly a universal museum. There has been skeptics around the world for 10 years building this museum, saying that museum will just be another Western museum in this region. Yet the moment you get into this museum, it's a mix of time, cultures, different time and culture under the same roof, in the same room at the same time. Again, looking at the building itself and what's in the building, beyond that is the creative sector, is the cultural sector. The jobs that we are creating, those new jobs, we didn't have such jobs 10 years ago. So for us, we're creating new jobs. 15 years ago, there were a few jobs that are looking into the creative sector. Now we're looking into how can we measure such creative sectors, and we have some certain great models. If it's in the UK, the way they measure the creative sector is something that inspires me personally. The reason why is we understand that when there will be cuts, it will go to arts and marketing. That will be the first two budget cuts going to that. But looking at what we're doing is, number one, we're looking at what are we going to do beyond the era of oil. This is number one. And again, at the same time, we are living in a region that is very rich with culture, with stories, with civilization. Unfortunately, we are living amongst also countries that there are certain architects is being destroyed, yet how can we work on that? But most importantly, how we can develop the youth, how we can get it in their education. Schools will go. During my days, I didn't have a museum to go and visit. So imagine the difference with a 5-year-old kid going to the Museum of the Louvre or going to the kids section and understanding arts and growing by learning that this can be a field, this can be my career one day. And that will encourage, will just encourage that dialogue, that open dialogue between what we have in the UAE and what is available globally as well.
So I'm pleased you've raised the issue of young people. If we are going to change the narrative of each other, we're going to have to start with young people. But how do you think we make politics and policy making appealing? And I'm talking about, specifically politics and policy making, not activism and protest. David, how's it appealing, politics for young people?
Well, I think they're going to make their own politics.
They're going to design their own politics.
They're going to design their own. They are engaged in the world. They're going to use new tools in new ways. We're seeing that in the United States right now with a movement of young people who are saying, gun violence has got to stop. They've sort of created a national movement out of nothing, and we've seen that in other parts of the world as well. I think we need to expect that the institute. If you go around the world right now, and you interview millennials, and you say, what's your view of the problems we face? One of the things that will come up most frequently is distrust of institutions. Mm-hmm. Well, they distrust institutions because sometimes institutions are corrupt or sometimes they foment inequality. But the main reason they distrust institutions is that they are antiquated and that they do not work and that they are unable to keep up with the pace of change. And I think, one of the things I think the UAE deserves a lot of credit because it's a new country to some extent, but they have embraced the idea of how do you reinvent government? How do you reinvent these institutions? How do you use these new technologies in new ways? And they've been really, they haven't just been regional leaders on this. They've been world leaders on this. And I think there's a lot to learn from that.
If I may add to David's point as well, when we talk about youth, during my previous job, being a Minister of Federal National Council Affairs, was the equivalent to the Parliament, we have a youth minister. And part of her job is how can also we include youth when it comes to shaping policies, working policies, and also being part of any minister's agenda when it comes to what can be done for the next, let's say, 100 days when you first start your first 100 days as a ministry, and then later on your how this will link into the strategy. We do have a centennial 2071 vision in the UAE that we're following, but looking at our youth minister, we started with youth circles. And I remember inviting youth to discuss what do they know about the Federal National Council. How can they participate? And in the future, they might be a Federal National Council member or not, but they need to be aware. How can they be aware? How can they be aware that that candidate is the right candidate that will represent their Emirates in the future? So by having such circles, and this is just one example, the circles, hundreds of circles have been conducted, whether in the UAE or outside of the UAE, how you include youth. And I'll give you a very quick story. Even the way that we interview youth is different nowadays. The moment you start with 2 questions, the third question is for them, give me the job. Let me prove myself. I don't want to waste another hour with me for having such interview. But this is just the spirit of the youth that we have here in the UAE. I think it is so important to include youth in government, to have a minister that represents youth in government, and he has to be young. Again, at the same time, they do speak a language that we understand, but it's different when they're also the force that supports you to take it to the next level.
And how old is the youth minister?
She's 23 years old.
So this is the point, right? So optimism. Are you both optimistic that some of the atonalities that we've heard about this morning are going to be resolved then in the short term through cultural partnerships, through young people coming into politics? What's your level of confidence?
My confidence, I'm not even going to get into, but I tend to be optimistic. The history of civilization is a positive story. We live longer, we're healthier, we're better educated, there are fewer wars, there are fewer people who die violent deaths. We are, everybody is exposed to more information, more knowledge, more access to it than ever before in history. This is the best time in the world to live, regardless of what the newspapers say. And I think that'll continue. What I worry about is that periods of radical transformation, where institutions are out of sync with the rest of society and unable to keep up with them, tend to produce upheaval. And I think that we are in a very dangerous period because our international institutions, a lot of national institutions, are completely misaligned with where we are going and with the needs of rising generations.
Are you optimistic, Your Excellency?
We're always optimistic. I mean, being here in the UAE, we can't not be optimistic. It's a new country where, the model is new. The founder adapted the change. He had a vision. We adapt to change. It's a government. It's called the future of the cabinet of the future. We have to adapt. We have to be ahead of the curve. And for that, we always need to be optimistic and find common grounds in culture.
I think that's a very good way to end this session. If I may, thank you both. Your Excellency, David, many thanks. Thank you.